Thank you for coming to join us for the presentation of the State of the Capital Region's housing. As all of you who live in the DC region know, housing is expensive. It's the single largest item in most families' budget, and the cost of housing just keeps going up and up and up over time, right? So this is a problem for individuals, for families, for employers who want to retain and attract good workers. This is a problem for local governments and nonprofits that are trying to help their residents make the ends meet. So we're very excited today to release a report. The report that you're going to see shortly is a collaborative effort. So I worked with three colleagues, Leah Brooks, who's an associate professor at George Washington's Trachtenberg School of Public Policy. She's also the faculty director of the Center for Washington Area Studies, which is the umbrella group that is releasing the report. My other two co-authors are Jackie Begley, who's an economist at Fannie Mae, and Brian McCabe, who's an associate professor of sociology at Georgetown. So this was very much bringing together a number of organizations to work on a report on an issue that is important to people from different academic disciplines and different walks of life. So I'm not going to talk for very long. I'm shortly going to turn it over to Leah, who will give you sort of the key findings from the report. But I wanted to take a moment just before we start to talk a little bit about sort of, it may seem a little unusual to you that Brookings is giving a report about housing in the DC region. So many people know Brookings as an institution that focuses on national or even international public policy. And traditionally, we have done more of that than focusing on the policy issues in our own backyard. That said, there are some noted scholars who have engaged very deeply with the DC region. And as many of you may have read, last week we lost one of those colleagues. So Alice Rivlin had been at Brookings for many, many years. She had all sorts of obituaries written about her, talking about the important federal policy roles that she held as director of the Congressional Budget Office, vice chair of the Federal Reserve Board. But any of you who have been working with DC policy and politics over the last several decades will probably have encountered Alice in a different capacity. She was very deeply committed to the district's financial sustainability. She worked closely with former DC Mayor Tony Williams to help bring the district out of financial insolvency. Alice believed very firmly that the people of DC, rather than Congress, should have control over their own budget, and that the district's government should have a stable resource base in order to address its community needs to be able to pay for public schools and healthcare and things like affordable housing. So Alice, unfortunately, couldn't be here with us today, but we are hoping that we are going to be able to do some ongoing work in the DC region. Brookings as an institution is anchored in a community, and people like Alice and I believe that Brookings should not turn its back on its hometown, that we should devote some of our scholarly resources and expertise to making the district and our region a better place for all of its residents. So I want to start by having a moment of silence to observe the memory of Alice. Thank you. And we're also going to actually observe Alice in the fact that there is a box here next to me. This is the Alice Rivlin box for people who need a little assistance to rise up behind the podium. And so Leah's going to come stand fittingly on the Alice Rivlin box and give us our report.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Karen. Hello, everybody. You see I needed the box. In fact, Alice Rivlin is taller than I am. It's an honor to greet you all. It's also an honor to stand on Alice Rivlin's box. As Jenny said, this report is co-authored, and Jackie and Brian, you'll meet. I also want to say thank you to Deepak Agrawal, who did most of the graph work for this presentation, to Hillary Silver, who helped us write about homelessness, and also to Julia Greenberg, who helped us write and edit the report. So with no further ado, this year we're talking about housing growth and affordability. And I want to briefly introduce the Center for Washington Area Studies. So our mission as a center is to improve the lives of people in the greater Washington area. Our goal is to study the area, to provide a data-driven set of policy recommendations and research that makes the area both cohesive and helps us better understand where we live with a goal of improving people's lives. So here's the bottom line from the report. Since 1980, housing values have grown quite substantially. You can see the peak here with the boom in housing prices, but even absent that, there's been a substantial growth in housing prices over this period since 1980. And this is probably clear to almost everybody in the room. because you can see other people's housing prices. It's harder to see other people's income, but we do know that that income has not risen like housing prices over this period. And if housing prices were rising but income was too, we wouldn't be so concerned. So what's concerning is the divergence between these two trends. So what we do in this report is we have two parts. The first part, we discuss the amount and location of new housing in the capital region since 2000. And in the second part, we provide some demographic and economic statistics on each individual jurisdiction in the region. So I'm going to walk you through the first part, and I'll spare you the gory details of the second part, which you can find online. All right, so the first chapter of the first part asks where and how much new housing is built. And we're going to define the area, the Washington, D.C. capital region, in this way. We have the dark blue urban areas. That's D.C., Arlington, and the city of Alexandria. We have suburban areas in light blue. And then we have ex-urban areas surrounding that in green. Remember those colors because they're going to go through the rest of the graphs. Okay. So the first fact we want to share with you is that housing growth in this area is, since 2000, is predominantly ex-urban. So this chart is showing you the number of housing units built by each type of jurisdiction. And I think you can be easily misled walking around downtown DC and seeing building cranes, but don't be, now that you've come here. You will know that the predominant growth is ex-urban. And then we can divide that growth by region. And what you can see when you divide the growth is that ex-urban growth is about half accounted for by Loudoun and Prince William counties, that suburban growth is predominantly in Fairfax and Montgomery counties, and that the urban and suburban growth is just slightly under the total ex-urban growth. And in this picture, what we're showing you is median housing value along the x-axis in 2000 and the percent change in the number of housing units on the y-axis. So if you can read the green words kind of at the top of the graph, you will see you'll see Loudoun County. So Loudoun County has had over 75% housing growth since 2000. We considered taking it off the charts because it's so off the chart. But we kept it on so you could get a true sense of what's going on in the region. And you can see that the higher the original median housing value as of 2000, the fewer housing units were built over about the next 2 decades. In the second chapter, we look at how many units new housing structures have. So let me give you a little bit of background. These are structures that are built before the year 2000. This is the share by unit type. So of structures built before 2000, most of them were single family. And then there's a fair chunk that are 15 to 19 units and some that are more than 50 units. So this is telling you the share of units. So most units are single family, but there's, in the region, there are some multifamily units. Now we're going to compare that with the share built after 2000. So that's the darker purple bar on top. And I think what's striking when you compare these two figures, and this is a period over which the region adds a lot of people, we do an awful lot of talking about transit-oriented development, the benefits of density, and we're still building an awful lot of single-family housing. And people like it. I do. So at the bottom of the graph, what you see is the divergence in the multifamily housing, that after 2000, we have switched to building substantially more 50 or more unit structures. Why this is open to debate, but I think this isn't a pattern that's true just about Washington. This is a pattern that's true more generally. And in this picture, I'm reiterating the fact that most housing growth is in the exurbs, and so these bars are showing you tens of thousands of new housing units by jurisdiction, and I want to point out that in the exurbs, most of that housing growth, with some exceptions, but most of that housing growth is single family. In the urban areas at the top in dark blue, we're talking about, for the most part, less than a quarter of new units being single family units. And the suburban areas are somewhere in between those exurban and urban numbers. In Chapter 3, we ask how housing costs compare to incomes. And, the bottom line, as any Washington area residents know, is that housing is expensive. So this graph is telling you that the average homeowner in Washington, D.C. owns a home that is about 6 times his or her household income. And you can see that these numbers are highest for the urban jurisdictions, and then there's a mix across the suburban and exurban jurisdictions. But any way you want to look at it, in any jurisdiction in the Washington region, housing is expensive. This national number for the home price to income ratio is somewhere around 3, and in the DC area it's somewhere about 5. This picture shows you an analogous figure for renters. It's looking at the gross rent divided by renter income. So in some jurisdictions, and particularly the exurban ones, we see that renters are paying above 30% of household income towards rent. Interestingly, those figures are not highest in the urban areas. So here's the bottom line, what to take from all of these charts. First, roughly half of the housing growth since 2000 in the Washington area was exurban, and half of that was in Loudoun and Prince William counties. And as you've seen, single-family construction has dominated since 2000. And single-family construction comes with, when we construct single-family housing, that's a decision that persists for probably at least half a century, if not longer, with implications for land use patterns and for transit. And house price gains have also outpaced income gains. So in the Washington area, most residents live in jurisdictions where they're paying about 5 times their household income for a house, as compared to the rest, the U.S. average, where residents are paying about 3.5 times. So after that, maybe not so uplifting news, you can look in our report to make a comparison of your jurisdiction with other jurisdictions. So what we do in the report, which I don't do here, is show you demographic and housing characteristics by jurisdiction, but here's an example. So on the left, you have Washington, D.C., and showing you the number of units by structure type in 2017, and on the right, you have Loudoun County. So you can see that in Loudoun County, roughly more than 3/4 of units are single family. In DC, that number is under 1/2. And that in DC, there are a number of large multifamily structures with 50 or more units. And in Loudoun County, there are not so many of them. In the report, we have analogous figures for race, for income, and for other demographic features. So looking forward, we put out this report to say that local decisions about housing development have cumulative regional consequences, and we'd like to help policymakers think about those consequences in a regional framework. And the decisions we have currently made about development predict increasing demand on driving infrastructure, with long run costs. And furthermore, limited growth in the region's housing stock is a challenge to regional economic growth. So, our charge going forward is to think about ways that we can expand the housing stock to provide housing for people across the entire income distribution in a way that is equitable and financially feasible. And I also want to say we anticipate this being an annual report. This is the 2019 State of the Capital Region. We hope to be back next year with the 2020 State of the Capital Region, to which you are all warmly invited. And you can find us online. The full report is online, both at the Center for Washington Area Studies webpage and at the Brookings webpage. So thank you all.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.